Representatives from San Diego and Carlsbad, California, and they will outline how they leverage data to track outcomes and showcase the impact of their projects. So with that, let me introduce Rachel Maltz, Senior Program Manager of Economic Development at the City of Carlsbad in California. Carlsbad has built systems to measure road safety, developing heat maps of dangerous intersections to inform planning around how to address the problem and measure the impact of their interventions. We're also joined by Bethany Bezak, Director of Transportation for the City of San Diego, California. San Diego has created a performance and analytics department, an open data policy, and has hired a chief data officer. Through this effort, they've used data to evaluate and prioritize improvements in the city's physical infrastructure. They've also implemented a system of smart streetlights that assess environmental quality and measure progress against the city's climate goals. So welcome, Bethany and Rachel. I'm going to start in San Diego. Bethany, San Diego has built comprehensive data system to measure the quality of infrastructure and prioritize repairs. Can you talk about the evolution of this project? What kind of data are you collecting? How's it being collected? And how do you use it to measure impact?
Yes, well, thank you so much, Nicole. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm so pleased to be with everyone today. So, yes, really, a data-rich environment is at the heart of what we are operating in. And in fact, that's not unique to the city of San Diego. So, municipalities, we all have a large inventory of infrastructure, so a very data-rich environment, and we have a lot of people that we have the potential to impact through that data-rich environment. So, it's really incumbent upon us to be able to leverage that inventory and that infrastructure and to be able to communicate and tell the story, as Nicole was mentioning. So I love that, the telling the story with a people first attitude. And so what I want to talk through is a few different examples of projects and how we've done that. I would say that data is really important in that it falls under a few different categories. And all of these different tracks or categories are incredibly valuable to be able to get to the point where you can tell the story and communicate with residents to be able to move change forward. So the first thing is the very basic level is we need to have good inventory of our infrastructure. So without the inventory, knowing where things are located, it's really difficult to be able to get to the point where you can tell the story, you can advocate for resources, and then you can make meaningful differences in terms of our communities. So having a robust inventory is very important. The second thing is, okay, not just the inventory, but we need to know the condition of the infrastructure. So when was something installed? Where was it installed? How frequently does it need to be maintained or replaced? That condition information is so critical in terms of developing compelling projects and the investments and the need for that. And so that gets to the third track that I'll mention here, which is the fiscal and the financial impact. I would say having that good inventory and then the condition information allows us to be able to know what the fiscal need is and to where to develop compelling projects for communities. And then the last one is this community customer service impact, which allows us to tell the story. When we have that good data, we're able to advocate for the resources, then we're able to have those projects to make the benefit within our communities. And being able to then share it in a way that's transparent and is really open has been really the heart of where the city of San Diego has taken our infrastructure. As Nicole mentioned, we do have a performance and analytics department. And as the city's transportation director, I'm constantly working with that team. And I love to say that they are, in the best way possible, they are the data nerds. They know the data, they love the data, they want to be able to use it to make meaningful decisions. And so we do have somewhat of a what I would call a 311 system, but we call it Get It Done, which is an online platform that has been developed for customers to submit all of their maintenance needs and their requests into that platform. But really, where I want to pivot with the rest of the time I have to do this introduction is to speak about two different projects in terms of where we've been able to use this data for the benefit of communities. The first one is related to trees and tree inventory. So, the city of San Diego, we knew that we had, oh, plus or minus at least 200,000 trees across our city. But we didn't know exactly where they were. We knew that we had a tree canopy goal of by 2035 to have a 35% tree canopy cover across the city. But without having that inventory, we weren't able to really get to the outcomes that we wanted to. We weren't able to tell the story. We also weren't able to advocate for the resources. So several years ago, we actually flew the city with LiDAR data, and we were able to inventory the tree canopy, the locations of trees. We validated that with in-person field confirmation of condition of trees. And we now are able to say that we actually have a 14% tree canopy compared to where we want to be at 35%. So being able to have that baseline was incredibly helpful. And to understand then what was the fiscal need for where we wanted to develop projects to get to that long-term goal of the 35% tree canopy. And I'm pleased to say that with having that information, we were able to advocate for a $10 million US Forest Service grant because we had some of that foundational information that helped us say, hey, we've got a good benchmark, we've got a good baseline, and now this is what we're able to do with it. So with this $10 million, it's a 5-year program. We're able to actually make investments in some of our underserved areas where the tree canopy is low, where we've got some of that high urban heat island effect. And now we've been able to take locations that had empty tree wells where there should have been a tree, and we've been able to plant over 1,000 trees just in several months within some of these neighborhoods. And that has allowed us really to have this great level of engagement with the community. It's everything from the door hangers and the online tools, but we've seen a really tremendous outreach effort that people have been very receptive to because we had that data. And then the second opportunity I'll mention here is also our street inventory. So our last street inventory was back in 2016, and so we were actually well outside of the typical standards for how we wanted to perform our street condition assessments. Typical benchmarking is every 4 years, and we had been already approaching the 8-year mark. And so in 2023, we did make that investment, really worthwhile investment, to survey the condition of our roads. And what that told us was that the condition of our roads had decreased over time. So it wasn't a big shocker, but what was even more valuable is to know exactly segment by segment what the condition of that road was. What was the type of maintenance or repair, rehab treatment that was needed on individual segments across the city? And that actually was really foundational because then we were able to create an online mapping tool where people are able to go in, see when the last time their street was repaved, when is the next time that it's forecasted to be repaved. And so people have that interaction. There's more trust and confidence by people knowing that it is foundationally based in data. And data is the truth about how we prioritize our road repairs and our infrastructure. And while people might not like where the investments go, at least they know that we're making strong decisions that are founded on data. And especially in a fiscally tight situation, we're actually in a very significant budget deficit in the city of San Diego. That has allowed us to tell a really transparent story and to have an open line of communication with people about the challenges. And quite honestly, having this information allowed us to forecast the 10-year funding need for our paving program. And it was somewhat of the basis about being able to tell that story for a sales tax increase that was on the ballot in November of last year. Unfortunately, it narrowly did not pass by just a few thousand voters. But really, ultimately, without having that information, we wouldn't have been able to tell this full story. So I share with you some of those very specific examples because I think it starts to connect those pieces that Nicole was mentioning in terms of telling that story, being a people first organization, and then really being able to advocate for the funding and compelling projects and resources for the city. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Bethany. I'm just going to dig into a couple of things you said and blend in a couple of questions that we have in the chat because you really did hit on the key parts. So first, it really was developing that goal, the 35%, uh, tree canopy. So that's so key that you had that number. So one of the questions in the chat is, how did you identify that baseline benchmark at the beginning of the project, and what information did you need to have in order to make that determination?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So it comes down to we had a big vision. We had a really big champion for climate action in the city of San Diego. And so we had climate action goals that go across much of our infrastructure. And we knew that the 35% tree canopy was going to change the course of the urban heat island effect. We knew that building out living infrastructure with trees and that network would provide the communities with that canopy that we want at the street level. And so we were able to get to the point where we knew that that was the threshold, the 35%. You bring up a great, point here that you do have to have that vision in mind and then be able to have a very quantifiable way that you're going to target that goal. For streets, I will say the vision has been a pavement condition index score of 70. So that's another example of having that quantifiable milestone that we've got to target. And sometimes that comes from the big picture vision, having a champion at the city or municipality. And sometimes it comes from typical benchmarking standards. I'll say on the street side, 70 is a benchmarking standard that most municipalities use. And so I think it just depends on the nature of the asset and the nature about where you want to head with your city.
That's great. And that points out, two important issues. One, connecting your outcome goal to the broader strategic goals of the city, which I think that clearly makes a lot of sense. And then, looking towards those best practices and benchmarks. That's really helpful. Another question was, how did you fund that initial canopy analysis? Once you had your outcome goal, being able to understand how hard it was to increase that based on your canopy analysis was really important. So how did you fund that initial canopy analysis?
Yeah, great question because it actually wasn't funded through a grant or something specific like an outside funding source. We actually knew that it was just pretty foundational to how we needed to do business. And so we thought the several $100,000 investment was well worth that. I will say though, what was really compelling about that was we actually flew the aerial topography and did that LiDAR assessment, not just for the tree canopy. So we leveraged that to gather as much information as we possibly could with that flyover of the city. And we also used it as the basis for a stormwater funding strategy as well to know where our infrastructure needs were as well in terms of impervious area and mitigating for runoff on private properties. So I would say when you're focused around data, you can use some of those opportunities to leverage lots of big city challenges. And so we just knew that that was something that was important enough that we needed to fund initially to be even able to set us up for some of these other wins in the future.
That's great. It seems like you took that same strategy with your innovative smart technology for street lamps. You're collecting a lot of different interesting data through that project. Can you talk a little bit about all the data you're collecting there and how you're leveraging that data?
Yeah, sure thing. So on streetlights, gosh, that's so interesting because then it brings in this energy mix. It brings in trying to reduce the overall carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions. And so by knowing our overall inventory of our streetlights, so we've got 60,000 across the city, and to be able to know, quite frankly, some very basic information, which one is on, which one is off, why it's on or why it's off is really helpful. And then being able to have information about the condition of the actual lamp itself. So whether or not it's more the incandescent, right? The old school 1950s type of technology, or we've been able to convert it over to LED. That's all been really helpful because it pushes us towards some of those bigger picture city goals. So it's about knowing, again, that condition, where things are located, and when the maintenance and the repairs are needed ultimately. And we've got some interesting partnerships actually underway with some public-private partnerships for us to be able to see if the benefits of this cost savings by retrofitting some of those lamp heads can ultimately lead to some benefits fiscally in both the public sector and the private sector. So again, having that information has been really helpful even on the energy conservation side.
That's great. And one thing I just point out, sometimes when we hear data infrastructure or data system, it sounds really overwhelming, but you're really just talking about counting and knowing the how many and the status of your infrastructure, your street lamps, your trees. So I think that's really important just to note that a lot of this is just having a good sense of what resources you have and what's the state of those resources. So one thing I just two more quick questions and we'll move to Carlsbad. But all of the data that you have here that you've been talking about is all publicly available in databases. I think that's so exciting. So can you talk about transparency and why it's been so important in this regard?
Yes, absolutely. So yes, so I mentioned about Get It Done. So that is this interactive platform that people can submit their requests and their needs in, and making sure at a very foundational level that people know when I submit a request, I know where it's going and I'm able to get real-time information about the status of that request. That has been really valuable. So that's more on the day-to-day interaction with customers about their maintenance needs. But then I will say with these other bigger picture programs, when you collect this large amount of data, you want to make sure that people understood the significant investment that was made really on their behalf and that they're able to interact with it in a way so that they can find answers to information to be informed, quite honestly. And it's really incumbent upon us to be able to make sure they have that information. So when you're going into tough types of conversations, budget decisions, those types of things, that people know that that data is accessible. And I think when you have it accessible to people, it's more at their fingertips, then you start to build some of that, or breaking down some of those barriers of big government and not knowing how decisions are being made or funding is going. When it goes back to basic data management, I think that you can kind of dispel some of those initial issues and you can really get to the heart of what people are really concerned with. But a lot of times when you don't have that data transparency, it gets challenging to even have the first set of conversations.
Yeah, that's great. And you've, spoken to this a little bit already, but and that point about transparency lends itself to community engagement. But could you just talk a little bit more about how community engagement played a role in this effort and continues to play a role going forward?
Yeah, sure thing. So on our tree program, so this gets down to the engagement is at the literally house by house type of level. So it's having this information, but then it's going all the way down to the door knocking, the community forums, meeting people in their third place, the libraries, the churches, those types of things. And so it's being able to make that information relatable, really down to the block by block level. I would say from a street inventory perspective, it's similar in that way, but people not just care about the trees outside of their house, people care about the streets everywhere they drive. And so that's even a little bit of a different challenge in that people need to understand the whole network of infrastructure everywhere they're going to drive outside their house, to their library, to their work. And so it's a little bit of a different type of scaling. And so we've had to engage with those different groups of users in different scalable types of ways. Like I said, with the tree, it's about the engagement, literally down to the tree outside their house. With the roads, it's more about making sure those large corridors that a lot of people are traveling on are addressed and are being handled. And we're having a larger type of conversation around those larger thoroughfares. So it tends to change the nature of the conversation, but either way, having that online data has been really helpful.
That's great. Well, thank you, Bethany. We're going to move to talking about the city of Carlsbad now, and then we will open it up for some conversation between the two of you. So, Carlsbad is another What Works Cities certified city that's made some real progress for their city using data. And recently, Rachel, Carlsbad has successfully used data to address road safety, developing heat maps to identify dangerous intersections, and developing the needed data infrastructure to track and measure progress towards meeting the goal. So, can you discuss this effort, how it came to be, and how the city planned and implemented it?
And thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Rachel Maltz. I work for the City of Carlsbad in the Economic Development Department, and I actually had the opportunity to lead our city's What Works Cities application and taking our city from silver to gold in the last year. A lot of that work stems around data management and tracking performance across the city. In particular, the one incident that Nicole just mentioned was around a traffic safety ordinance that we were looking to improve on. So it actually stemmed tragically from a traffic-related death. It deeply impacted our community, and it was made clear that there needed to be some immediate action that needed to happen across our city to address this. Well, it happened, before I joined the city of Carlsbad. It's a well-known story that kind of shaped our community and how we approach road safety today. The city had an ordinance on e-bike safety. And before this, we were tracking data as it related to these incidents that were occurring. We actually saw there was over a 200% increase involving bikes and e-bikes between 2019 and 2022, which really kind of drove and promoted this initiative for our city to take. So we actually quickly mobilized. We put, 2 million aside for funding for our Safer Streets program. That's a new program that came out of this effort. And it was really focused around the 3 E's, we call them: engineering, enforcement, and education. I'll walk us through a little bit more on those in particular. But why, again, we did this was we were noticing more social patterns that were happening in the community. Transportation habits were changing, particularly around the rise of e-bike usage. And again, we needed to really adapt when the city didn't have clear guidance or regulations, especially from the state, on how to use this new technology in the community and how it was really impacting. So it was really a community-driven effort with a strong sense of urgency from our residents, and particularly, how are we going to protect the youth that are using this new form of transportation? So we planned and implemented this, and it was more so across collaborative effort, especially with transportation, our police, and our community development department. To really focus again on those 3 E's. So the engineering one in particular was, how was the city designed? Where could we actually see these incidents occurring? So we actually started creating heat maps and planning and tracking this to see where they were occurring across the city. And that data really helped drive the effort, which also led to enforcement. So again, working with PD, so they were, slowing people down and making sure that those individuals were remaining safe, but then also education. So having PD and transportation go into our schools, into our community, creating campaigns and awareness to make sure that this was an effort that needed to be supported.
Great. Can you talk a little bit about how did you know? I mean, right up front, you started talking about that data needed to guide the effort. How did how did that come about that you knew you needed data to guide this effort? And then how did you build the data infrastructure to make that possible? What are the data you're collecting?
Yeah, so we had to build out a more robust data infrastructure, but it wasn't as complicated as it seems. Initially, it's just how we're actually tracking this type of specific incident. So PD would actually classify this as just bike-related incidents, but it was unclear whether or not it was an e-bike or was it a normal type of bike that everyone else would, normally ride. So that's actually one thing that we did, was actually diving into the data, and we actually created and shifted around how we track this information. So that was one of the big shifts on actually creating a new category to actually see what type of incident was occurring as it related to these traffic related incidents across the city. So that's where we actually recreated a category. And then we used that data to actually start building heat maps to seeing which specific high collision intersections or corridors that individuals were experiencing these incidents. And that's where we were actually able to visualize. And that started kind of creating the effort on the engineering components and how we actually could modify some of these infrastructures across the city. So that's something that we took from that approach, but it really initially stemmed for how we actually begin tracking these incidents as it relates to the city. So it's really helping inform our future investments, figuring out which projects need to take priority, where we're seeing we should shift funding to certain projects based on where there's more traffic incidents and collisions at certain areas or certain intersections. So really, again, the data informed our decision making on how do we prioritize certain projects over another. And then that also helps with policy decisions. So when we present these items to our city council, they have informed decision making abilities based on the data.
That's great. So it sounds like you're using the data to not only decide where changes need to happen, but what kind of changes need to happen. Can you talk a little bit more about the types of interventions the city implemented to address the collisions, and maybe to what extent they were informed by the new data you were collecting?
Definitely. So the data helped, I guess, us transform on how we prioritize certain capital improvement projects. Generally, I think cities, kind of experience this similar. They're not sure at what point they should leverage funding for certain projects over another. So this really helped us, I think, align our funding and our design improvements when we identified that these were high risk areas in our analysis. And that really, again, stemmed from our ability to track these incidents across the city. I think for us, we implemented a lot of new traffic calming measures. We adjusted signal timing, we created new bike lanes, and then we really targeted that education campaign to our local schools and broader community. I think that was a key decision in terms of making sure the community has awareness of these issues, but then also how it translates back to the community in terms of what we're doing from a design infrastructure standpoint. And again, we continuously involved, how we're collecting this data, how do we make it more accessible so also the community can tap into it, but also how does it affect our decision making? And it helps us, I think, track more on emerging trends and where we can deploy these resources. So ultimately, I think it's a combination of, data, community input, but then also using that for targeted action so we become a more informed, equitable city, and ultimately trying to improve the lives and safety of all of our residents and the broader community.
Great. Well, you've touched on two of the questions in the chat, but maybe we could just dig into them a bit. So do you have information on how many residents access your open source data? So really exciting that it sounds like you're finding a lot of ways to tell the community exists. Are they taking you up on the offer?
Definitely. And I think we report a lot of this out at community events, and we also bring it to our city council. And that's kind of a regular process that we've incorporated in our practice of just making the data more transparent. We're always continuously working on our open data portal and trying to make data more accessible to the community. And that's one approach we've taken through this initiative on making more transparent data accessible as it relates to traffic incidents across the city. So that's one thing we're continuously working on as it relates to being more transparent with our open data.
And that leads to the next question. So how are you using the data to communicate back to residents about the progress, and how is that being received?
Yeah, so this one's actually really unique. When we first started tracking this data, we were really focusing on the reduction in these incidents. So we had roughly about 19% when we started implementing this new program. Over time, we've seen that number actually decrease. We have more than half of the city's incidents. So that really helps us, make sure we're staying on track. We're seeing that our efforts are supporting our work and that we are really, truly improving the lives of our residents here in Carlsbad. We're making the community more safer. So I think, tracking those specific data points as well helps inform our decision making and also validates that our efforts are being successful across the community. So that's something else in particular that we're tracking.
That's great. Well, maybe I'll open it up to a little conversation between the two of you. So what do you think has been the key to being able to get the support of your cities to build the data that you needed to make these decisions? And do you think the fact that you're able to show this data back will help continue that support, or what do you think needs to happen to continue on the path of letting data guide the way in these decisions and implementation of your projects?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bethany.
It's okay. Go ahead, Rachel. I can go second.
Okay, I was gonna say, for us in particular, I think it's really that community impact. For our effort, it was really community based, and we want to, improve the lives again of our residents to show that we are collecting this information, we are tracking it, but we're also making it actionable. I think, being as transparent as possible on that data and information helps us create that community buy-in again, where the community feels safe. They feel like we're using this information to help improve, again, the lives, but also the infrastructure. So we're taking action on it. So I think that really is what helps our city have that relationship with our community.
Yeah, Nicole, at the city of San Diego, I think that what we found is that we were experiencing some of the effects of not having that data available for residents. And so
Mhm.
when we saw that that was going to be really impactful in terms of people not being able to submit their needs and their requests and engage with that information, quite frankly, we're having PR issues, we were having political issues, we were having operational needs. And so we just found that all of those actually could be improved through having this data. So, but to your point, it does take someone within a very high seat within the municipality, right, or the city to be that champion to say, yes, we're going to make that initial investment. And the initial investment is some of the biggest dollars, right, that you need to make in terms of selecting a platform or selecting whatever it is that you need functionally to be able to launch it. And then it's also, though, having that dedication to making those investments year over year, because it doesn't stop after that single investment. So it takes, I think, an organization that has that vision and then um, has the motivation to continue it forward.
Great. Well, I just want to point out that the city of San Diego and the city of Carlsbad's stories were linked earlier on in the chat. So those are tools that perhaps you can use when you're talking to your own leadership about why these types of investments are important and what they can lead to. One of the things I noticed when I was in local government was when we would find something that worked like this, innovative practice, like you're talking about using data to implement and guide projects. We saw other areas of the government use that. Have you seen that? Have you seen this practice spread in other projects?
I definitely say that there is a contagiousness, if you will, associated with it. So when I've worked really closely with our performance and analytics team, we've been able to go to other directors and share some of the case stories and some of the wins that have been really valuable. And then some of the other directors have said, oh, well, I have a great idea. And so it does start to pick up steam in terms of seeing, I think, the real opportunity that comes out of some of these applications. So yes, I absolutely think if you get some of those initial wins, then it really starts to perpetuate even further on its own.
Um, well, and then maybe a last question for each of you, and we'll open it up. So be thinking of any questions you might have. Um, what advice would you give cities interested in developing similar data efforts? What is something they should maybe think about in the beginning and throughout the project? Maybe we'll start with you, Rachel.
Yeah, I think for us in particular, it's starting with a clear question. It's what are you trying to solve? And if you don't know what problem you're trying to address, it's really difficult to know what data you're going to need. And I think from there, once you have a clear question, it's identifying the data what that you're going to need to track. So how are you actually going to measure those outcomes? How are you going to measure that success? Don't just, I guess, collect data for the sake of it. Collect it to have a purpose behind it. And I think from there, you're going to have a team. You're going to have a cross-functional collaboration across your city department. No one department in particular can do it alone. So I think you really need to have that buy-in, whether that stems from a leadership standpoint or a cross-functional team of staff. I think that's where you really need to help drive your effort. And ultimately, I think, you need to set clear goals for your effort. I think you need to know what you should change or what you want to improve, and then how are you going to be successful. So I think ultimately, since we do work for city governments, you're ultimately trying to think, how do you improve the lives of your community? So I think with that mindset, that will help keep your work pretty grounded and, focus on the outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, Rachel, actually, I'll piggyback off of that. I would say starting with the end in mind and making sure all of the appropriate entities across the city or county are involved early on in the process. So it's thinking about your operational teams, the people that are doing the work. It's thinking about the politics teams, right? It's the mayor's office and team and having them involved early and making sure there's no surprises in what you're doing. It's having the community engagement folks that are going to know what the needs are and what people are going to be requesting also in the room as well. And then also having the IT people. Sometimes IT folks can be very conservative and they're there to protect infrastructure and making sure that it's resilient. So, but also making sure that they know that they're going to have a role probably either in the hardware or the software deployment in any scenario. So making sure all those parties are on board early with that champion that we've already talked about.
Really great. Well, are there any last questions from our participants? Feel free to put them in the chat. But this has been really helpful, and I really just appreciate how you've talked through the whole, journey of a project from thinking about the beginning. Really great advice, Rachel, to just focus, know the problem you're trying to solve, and then focus on that throughout the project, and being able to tell the story at the end, I think, is so key. I appreciate how you both outlined that.
Great.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, thank you, Rachel and Bethany, for sharing your expertise and your experience. I will turn it back to Jamie to close out our session.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you to Bethany and Rachel for sharing your insights. As I put in the chat, you're with fellow data nerds, and so really excited to hear about how your projects were able to tell a story and to show residents that the city's really delivering on their key priorities and cares about both getting their feedback and doing things that always are putting residents in the driver's seat. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to launch a poll. It's always helpful for us to get information about what's working well and what support we can provide you to help with any gaps. And so please just take a moment to let us know if you're interested in getting more support to help you incorporate data into your infrastructure projects. We have great experts who can do that. And so please let us know, and we'll reach out offering more support. Just wanted to also promote that we are having a session next week on the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. Many of you may have been on our session last week where we had the new folks at the Department of Transportation talking about the administration's priorities as it relates to this program and how they'll be sort of reviewing applications with those priorities in mind. What we heard resoundingly is that people need really technical advice in crafting their applications. And so based on that demand, based on the poll results, we are putting together another session for next Tuesday at the same time. And it's we're going to bring some of the folks who know this best. So Robin Hutchinson was one of the people who was at the U.S. Department of Transportation and wrote the Safe Streets for All program, and so has a really profound understanding of what it looks like to design a program where safety is at its heart, and then how to embed the administration's priorities and reflect those back in a project application. Emily Winburn from Wood O'Brien, who's been helping cities for years work on both the budget for their applications and then what does a really compelling federal grant application narrative look like? How do you make sure that you're telling the story about your community so that the people who are reading the application can envision the project? They don't know all of our communities, and so we really need to bring that to life for them. And Justin Edwards, our fabulous partner at the National League of Cities, who has developed a bunch of data tools to help cities be able to access the kinds of data that will make a project more compelling. What are those crash data, near misses? This administration is prioritizing, for instance, families. How do you show that this is a project that will be helping families and maybe takes place near a school, for instance? And so he'll be on hand to support that. So the link to register is in the chat. Also, wanted to remind everyone next week is Infrastructure Week, and it's really a place where our partners from United for Infrastructure help drive national conversation around what does infrastructure look like and what is the sort of next generation of that. And so our series next week on safe streets and roads for all is part of amplifying the impact of this infrastructure and making sure that the projects that have been awarded funding continue being delivered. And so just encourage you all to check that out. Thank you so much for coming today. If there's anything that's pressing for you as a city that we haven't been addressing, please reach out to us. I'll share my email in the chat if you're just like, what I really need help with is, being able to do effective community engagement on an infrastructure project, whatever it might be. Let us know because we're always interested in your feedback, and I hope to see many of you next week. Thank you.